Hello there, John McWhorter. How are you doing?
Hey, Glenn. What's up?
Well, I'm welcoming you to the Glenn Show at bloggingheads.tv. You are a perennial guest at the Glenn Show. We are a tag team, John. Glenn and John, the black guys at bloggingheads.tv, have been called into service yet again because, John, it would appear that without ceasing, racial incidents and racial drama will present itself to the American public, to the Twitter sphere, to the blogosphere.
Yeah.
And somebody has to point the way through the thicket. And that falls to us, John. Are you up to it?
I think just this week I can try, yes.
Well, it's worth actually prefacing anything we say with this meta reflection about why you and I, Glenn Loury, Brown University, Professor of Economics, John McWhorter, Columbia University, Professor of Humanities and Linguist Extraordinaire, author of many books, etc., find ourselves in the situation, not that I'm complaining, not that I'm a victim, but still, of having to parse every little incident in a Starbucks. In a country of 300 million people, every time a security officer speaks to a person of color with the wrong tone of voice. Every time in murky circumstances in which violence is happening on a daily basis in the streets of this cities of this country, something goes awry, and the one on the shooting end happens to be a white cop, and the one on the receiving end happens to be a black kid. From the high to the low, it seems these incidents present themselves to us without ceasing, and we are called upon to comment on them. And I can understand a man getting weary of that, as I imagine that you may have done.
Yes. I mean, I make an exception with talking with you, and that is sincere. But, as we've discussed lately, I don't write about race nearly as much as I used to, because you start to feel like you're saying the same thing over and over again, and you're wondering how many people are listening. Although, do you know, Glenn, that there's a new meme this week? It's not only Starbucks and Kanye West, but I think you and I are the black members of a certain dark internet realm of, formally liberal or liberal/democratic voting, and yet to the New Yorker readers, annoying people who Barry Weiss wrote about in the New York Times this week. And so you've got Michael Shermer, the professional skeptic, and you've got Steven Pinker. You've got, of course, Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying, the biologist. And Heather Heying, I generally don't know what her area is, but who basically got chased.
Yeah, I know, Evergreen State. Yeah,
that whole crowd.
Wait a minute, we're in there? I just want to understand. You and I are included in this pantheon of miscreants?
We're in a group. Yes, Sam Harris and, Jonathan Haidt here in New York. We are part of what is coalescing as this dark internet group of people who I guess used to think of themselves as PC, but are now insisting that there's a certain resistance to empiricism among the people we used to think of as our sisters and brothers. I wanted to let you know that we're the black wing of that. That's what we do.
Oh,
and I
okay.
guess that's true.
Well, I'm going to look into that, John. That at least I'm being noticed.
Read Barry's piece.
I will read Barry's piece, and you say in the Times, and then there's the New Yorker. There's commentary in the New Yorker.
It's in the New York Times. Although actually, Barry, who I do know, she did not happen to mention us. But I've had a flurry of contact since she wrote it, saying that we are part of that as well. And I thought, I guess.
Well, we are part of that. I mean, that seems correct, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't have put it that way. But to the
we're heterodox, So,
well, come on. I mean, we got to talk about Kanye West and about the race issues of our day. But come on, we're still having this meta conversation. The tale that the progressives are telling themselves is falling apart. Okay, the center won't hold. Stuff is breaking up. Centripetal forces are at play. And anybody who is cutting against the grain, who is not in lockstep, or who doesn't reaffirm and reassure, is going to become a dark force, undermining, a subversive force, a complicit. He's going to become a useful idiot, John. That's what's going to happen.
I hear the transition coming. Yeah.
Well, no. I mean, I'm going to stand on my assertion that the center is not holding and that the stuff is breaking up. So on this white supremacy has done us wrong. Slavery of 1865 is still relevant to understanding the ebb and flow of American social, moral, and ethical and historical dynamic. No, not just that. America is a bankrupt, racist, corrupt, exploitative conspiracy, okay, of a bunch of thuggish, militaristic miscreants and misanthropes, okay? America's on the wrong side of history, okay? This is what's falling apart. The idea that social, I mean, I could go on and on in this, okay? I mean, there's just a lot of crap, right?
Yes.
And with respect to the race question, and I have maintained this here, and I'll stop and allow you to correct me, but the failures continue to mount. It's basically an open society. Notwithstanding its foibles, there is dynamism and opportunity here. Okay, the laggardly status of a massive proportion of the African American population is an indictment, in the first instance, of that paradigm from the mid-1960s that elevated claims about victimization and civil rights deprivation above a focus on the objective development of the performing capacities of the black population. The jails are full of people because they're committing crimes in the first instance, not because the 15th Amendment was a coded compact with the devil. The test score gap is a reflection of the failure of people to acquire cognitive skills which are essential to functioning in the modern world. Millions of people from impoverished corners of the world are acquiring these capacities and coming online to compete. In one arena after the other, the bankruptcy of this view about the condition of African Americans becomes evident. As I have said, these people, including Ta-Nehisi Coates, are bluffing, including the people who want to remove Amy Wax from a law school class at Penn because she's exposed some slanderous, lie. They're bluffing. The people who think that the president of the United States is an irredeemable racist who is at the front of an America-destroying political movement, if they don't win some elections, all they've got is bluff and bluster. And in the wake of all of this bluff, bluster, humiliation, and defeat, of all of this failure, fingers are going to be pointed at anybody who's prepared to pull the cover off of the thing and to tell the truth.
Now, Glenn, before we go on, because, audience, honestly, what Glenn and I really want to get to is Kanye West, and this is becoming a longer prologue than I think either one of us expected.
Fair enough.
What you just said, I'm sorry, Glenn, but I understand the spirit of it, but you understand this, and to me it's a kind of an obsession. You have to think about what's in the mind of the other people, and it won't do, if I may, to say that they're shilling or that they're faking. Ta-Nehisi Coates is not faking. He's giving us his real self. And it won't do to say that they're crazy, as some people will often say. There's some people who just say, oh, they're just crazy. And that's lazy. That you're not somebody who says that. But no, very few people are crazy. And I have to give you the counter-argument of the month that many people would give you about this, some of whom are possibly even watching this. The Starbucks incident, where two young black men go into a Starbucks off of Tony Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia. I grew up in Philadelphia. I remember that neighborhood. I remember sitting in Rittenhouse Square as a lad. I suppose this could have happened to me.
Even I know where Rittenhouse Square is.
Right. So, it's emblematic. And there's a Starbucks near it. Apparently, I'm not there anymore to see it. But these guys are waiting in Starbucks, and they're not drinking any coffee yet, and they're just sitting there. And basically, one of the white employees there thinks of them as miscreants, and one thing leads to another, and they end up being arrested. Now, I think you and I can agree that there was something wrong with that. Yeah. And I think you and I can agree that the reason that happened to those men was not because they were misbehaving. It was because they were black. Now, I think you and I both know, and I think you and I are more comfortable thinking this than a lot of people, white and black. The white person back there, I'm just going to take a guess based on Philadelphia, race relations, the racial composition of the area around Rittenhouse Square. We can take a guess that that white person may not be the most sensitive person in the world, but they're thinking, I remember that time 2 weeks ago when a couple of black teens came in or something like that. And then they're hopelessly overgeneralizing on the basis of that and getting these two men basically taken off to jail for no reason at all. And I remember, actually, I'm going to make this real quick. When I was about 19, me and a very good friend of mine, dark-skinned and black, were not too far from Rittenhouse Square, and there was a small Slavic bookstore. And, as you can imagine, geeky me, I wanted to peek into that little bookstore. And so we're walking along. I forget what we were really doing, but here's this bookstore. We walked into that bookstore. The woman behind the counter cringed so much, seeing, just me and my friend George, and, thugs we were not, cringed so much that I just left. I was uncomfortable. I just thought she's making this assumption. However, based on how the neighborhood goes and where the streets go, she wasn't basing that on nothing. She had almost certainly had some problems with black boys from a certain area near to where we were. So yeah, there's that. But you agree, Glenn, right, that what happened in Starbucks, one, was wrong, and two, was not just an isolated incident. That's what everybody's thinking when they hear what you just said.
No, it wasn't an isolated incident. Heck, my wife and I were down in New Orleans and having a little R&R a few weeks ago. And we went into a corner bar to get a po' boy, and they wouldn't serve us.
Kidding.
He ignored us, man. She went over, Lawan, my wife, and asked for a menu. He said, "I'll be with you in a minute." We sat there for 10 or 15 minutes.
And there's no minute. Right?
Other people came. No, it was an unequivocal racist affront. Okay, I mean, I'm absolutely certain of it. As far as these guys getting arrested out of Starbucks for being black out of Starbucks, of course, that was the wrong outcome of that encounter. I wasn't there, but I am prepared to believe that the discretion exercised by the manager was a reflection of poor judgment, perhaps of the sort that you described. I don't know what attitude and demeanor that they might have displayed. I don't know what attitude or demeanor that they might have displayed. Quite possibly, they could have contributed to the incident by belligerence. I don't know if that's the case or not, but even so, I wouldn't
see it on the tape.
I wouldn't excuse. Okay, well then, fine. Henry Louis Gates Jr. got arrested on his doorstep in Harvard Square. That should not have happened either. One might argue in that incident that his demeanor played some role in the.
Well, he
in the things
got
that came
up
about.
into their face. Yeah, that's
But in any case, happens every day. It happens all the time.
Doesn't that negate everything that you and I say?
No, because as you point out, it's like gum on the shoe. I mean, no one says that stuff doesn't happen. Microaggressions don't happen. The privileged suppositions of whiteness don't show themselves. These pieces have been written over and over and over again. They are indeed a fact of the warp and woof of American life. I agree with that. I suppose that if I'm black, it happens more frequently than if I'm Asian, but I imagine it happens to Asian. I suppose that if I'm Jewish, it may happen less frequently than it happens to Asians, but it probably happens to Jews. I suppose if I'm a pro-life Catholic, I probably encounter some smug and supercilious moral superiority from the people who are pro-choice who have contempt for my religion, and that probably hurts too. Okay? But, okay, here's what's not going to be said, what no one except Kanye West would say. Why would I be concerned about two black people being vagrants in my establishment? Why would I cross the street if I saw a bunch of young black kids coming along at a certain hour of the day? Why, if I were a police officer, would I be afraid when I approached the driver's side of a vehicle that I had stopped that was being driven by a young black man? Why? Where do these stereotypes come from? Okay, implicit bias built into the brains of white people, America, the blood dripping from its fangs, racist, etc. Or how about the super high rate of criminal offending in the African American population that might lead someone, under some circumstances, to type people? Now, is the typing right? No, they should be bigger and better than that. We all should, are we? No, not a single one of us is bigger than better than that. We're all typing all of the time. And the fact that this is a discussion that only engages the question of there's going to be implicit bias training, okay, and never addresses the question of what the substratum is, what the social facts that underlie the stereotypes. I can't even discuss it. Can't bring it up. If I bring it up, oh! So, dishonest discourse.
You know what really disgusts me, if we're going to get into this general area, is that our detractors would say that what we have to understand is that the Starbucks incident, that kind of thing, being a regular part of men like that's lives, means that it destroys their spirit, or at least that it eats away at their spirit to an extent that if there are any issues of underperformance or underrepresentation, we have to understand that it's because of that. And you know, that supposition actually makes me cringe even more. You know, you've got me lately in this business of expressing my anger on blogging heads instead of keeping it tamped down. What bothers me even more than the kind of genuflection to Ta-Nehisi Coates in my face, like expecting that I love him because of the color of my skin. What makes me even angrier is when anybody supposes that things like these microaggressions might get me down and keep me from being able to perform. And by extension, other black people, it is the most condescending thing. Like, for example, you mentioned the highly religious pro-life person today circulating on a college campus. They suffer more microaggressions, I think, weekly than you and I maybe ever have in our lives. And yet we would never say that that ought to depress their GPAs. You assume that they can cope. But somehow we can't. It's interesting. About 6 weeks ago, I was teaching a mini course on philosophy in a big office building downtown from here in New York City to older Columbia alums. It's one of the things that you're kind of asked to do if you've ever taught in the core. And so it was a mini course, and I did it 3 times. And the first time I went down there, and it was for the first class, and we're in a building on Park Avenue, and these are people of a certain age and station, and so I didn't walk in the T-shirt and stuff that I often will wear. I don't wear T-shirts, but polo shirt or something like that. I thought I have to kind of dress sort of normally this time. So I walk in, I'm in a sport coat and slacks, and in what used to be called an overcoat because it's kind of chilly. Okay. And I walk in, and it's in the law offices of one of these places. You can imagine what it looks like. We're on the set of The Good Wife or something. And here's the reception. She's white. She's 32. And her name is probably either Shari or Erica. And here she is. Oh, are you here for the thing? Yeah. Are you here to do the PA system? What? I'm sitting there in a sport coat and an overcoat and carrying a bag. And I just said, no. And she said, well, it's back here. And so I go back there. Now, why did she think I was there to crisscross some wires and check the lights? There was only one reason, and it was because I was, of course, the one black person there. Yeah. These are older Columbia alums, and none of them were black. So, why'd she think that? Now, that's a microaggression. Now, as far as I was concerned, I walked to, the back of the suite and took my place. I didn't tell anybody about this. I haven't talked about it outside of my house until right now. And I talked about Rousseau and Kant, and as far as I'm concerned, in the eyes of anybody who's up there, I proved that I've maybe gotten a little further in life than being a tech guy. That's it. I vomit at the idea that going through something like that once every 6 months means that I should be in some kind of therapy. So now that's not as bad as what happened to the Starbucks guys. But there is that denigration, and it's a very artful word in its way. But it does not mean that a person can't live their life. And yet that's what's expected of you and me and those Starbucks guys. Those Starbucks guys deserve everything that they get in terms of recompense. But yes, microaggressions do not destroy your spirit to survive. I don't like the idea that it does, because nobody expects that of anybody except the descendants of African slaves in the United States.
I hear you, John. I have great sympathy for not wanting to be treated in an infantilizing manner, being treated as someone who could not bear up under the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that we all encounter in life. I want to go back, however, and just underscore something I was saying a minute ago about how there's an objective basis for stereotypes, not only a bias in the minds of white people. There are disparities in the behavior that correlate with race. They're not caused by race. I think if African Americans cluster near the bottom or the bottom half of a law school class, if that's true, it's not because they're black. I think that if there are more African Americans amongst the people who are committing burglaries and robberies and assaults in the city, if that's true, it's not because they're black. I don't think their blackness causes it to be true. But I do think that their blackness is a visible marker, which, if it happens to correlate with something as important as whether or not someone's going to attack you on a dark street, will affect your behavior. I think that's true about every single person. I think it's hardwired into the cognitive apparatus that we use to make social judgment. And I think that's simply a fact that has to be reckoned with, along with many other facts. Okay, so the objection that I'm trying to underscore is a failure to take seriously that sometimes and in certain circumstances, like when a police officer is approaching a vehicle on a dark street in the middle of the night, these suppositions, which we're prepared to dismiss as just presumptively racist, are both rational and unavoidable. And one just simply has to reckon with that. So anyway, I've said that.
I largely agree with you, but I think we have to always keep in mind that for most people, what's emblematic is two guys sitting at Starbucks.
Yeah, I got that.
Not what Amy Wax was talking about, but yes, I completely.
Wait, excuse me for interrupting, but I just want to underscore again now that you mentioned that, something that you said earlier, which was that one must bear in mind, you say there was a certain logic in what I was saying during my rant, as I was venting my anger, which unfortunately I've infected you with the habit of doing, you say. Mm-hmm. But you say the only problem with what I was saying, or one problem with it, is that it's never going to compute in the minds of people who are going to see the world a certain way. And whatever the logic might be of what I was saying, they're going to see the world a certain way. And you and I have been at this juncture before where we've disagreed about this, because my view is that my job is to disabuse people of the wrong way of seeing things. The fact that they don't see them the way that I would urge them to see them at first is unavoidable. It's inescapable. It's built into the cake. I understand that. But because they don't see things that way, the presumption that they can't see them any other way is like a surrender. And I don't want to give up on these questions. So that's why I keep doing this.
There cannot be a surrender. And I have been thinking about the fact that I cannot be somebody where the history of me will be that when I was 52, I gave up because change happens too slowly. But I do think we always have to think about the fact that a lot of the people we tend to spill our guts to are more open to changing their minds than the mass of people thinking about these things. So that, for example, and I know we're going to get to Kanye in a second.
Yeah, well, we must.
Something that I learned this morning. You and I once talked about, and I'm going to let you tell me whether you want to out who this was and where it was. Remember we talked about how there's an august media organ which has an unstated policy that views that go counter to a certain basic narrative about race will not be allowed, such that a very smart person's article was edited but then turned down. Do you remember what this was?
Yeah, I remember what this was.
Now, I don't know if you want to out...
Well, no, I mean, we're talking about the New Yorker, and I don't know what role David Remnick might have played in this circumstance, and we're talking about Thomas Chatterton Williams' brilliant review Between the World and Me, Coates' blockbuster book, which Thomas ultimately published in the London Review of Books, but which sat for, I'm told, months on the editor's desk at the New Yorker and didn't make the cut. Now, I'm surmising if I say that the reasoning behind it was that it ran against a certain thing. Of course, I don't know that for a fact, but my informant, who is on the editorial staff at the magazine, assures me that that's the case. So.
Well, I just want to say that I very recently, in a very similar way, heard something like that about a university newspaper that I'm not going to name because I don't even get into it, but, same policy. And, time marches on and you just find yourself thinking, wow, there is an orthodoxy here. Anyway.
Well, like I say, it's a sign of weakness. I want to say one more thing, John, please. I'm sorry. And then we're going to get on to Kanye.
All right.
Okay. The other thing that I want to say is you say you believe that people like Coates are sincere. They're not shilling. They're not just saying stuff for effect. They really believe what they're saying. Mm-hmm. I don't doubt that for a minute. When I say they're bluffing, I'm not saying they're lying or they're acting. I'm saying they have a losing hand. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, you mean it in a more technical
I'm
way.
saying the reason that the volume is so high, the reason that those sentences in Ta-Nehisi Coates' tangled prose go on for paragraphs at length with one after another descriptor of the vicious and almost incomprehensible cruelty of American racism is because he hasn't got any cards, John. They're bluffing. That's what I'm saying. The people who say, you can't talk in public about how poorly African American students are doing at an Ivy League university law school are bluffing. They're going to lose. The people who say the 15th Amendment is a compact with the devil in the U.S. Constitution meant to perpetuate slavery by another name in the face of the massive incarceration of African Americans are bluffing. The people who say, don't you dare mention the SAT test score gap or the fact that there aren't many blacks at Caltech because otherwise you're a Charles Murray geneticist, are waving a bloody shirt. They don't have any argument. They don't have any evidence. They're bluffing. Okay, that's what I'm saying. This ship is going down, John. This is a sinking ship. It's bankrupt. There's a massive hole in the hull, and nobody knows how to bail water. All they know how to do is screech and scream. They're bluffing.
Glenn, one more thing then. I want you to parse this for me. 20 years ago now, I was at UC Berkeley, and racial preferences had been banned through the efforts of Ward Connerly, and the usual suspects were absolutely furious. And I, at the time, was kind of apolitical and trying to figure out what was going on. So this is way back. This must be 96. And I could see that there was a mismatch between what actually went on in the classroom among the relevant student body and what was being said about the necessity for racial preferences and why racial preferences were important and the relationship between poverty and the student body. I could just see something wasn't right. And I was trying so hard to agree with what seemed like the good people. I didn't want to be hated. I wasn't familiar with that yet. I wanted to understand. And so I went in with a naivete that I guess I should have been ashamed of, but genuinely trying to get why all these people around me were so appalled by changing racial preferences in the late 90s. And I couldn't quite see what the problem was. And one thing I noticed, and this is hard. This is something I'm working on. I was sitting in a meeting with two men of color. One of them was black, one of them was Latino, and there was somebody else in the room, and I forget who it was. And the idea was this was one of many meetings where people were trying to see how maybe they could get the overturning of the proposition turned back. The idea is to get racial preferences back, and that never really happened, but the idea was you were supposed to try to plan it. I went to this meeting to try to understand, and I asked one of these guys, I said, you know, back in the day, and this was not me being Socratic, this was a genuine question. I said, back when I was little, there was the idea of token black. The idea being that you bring somebody in who's underqualified to show that you like those people and to be inclusive, but it was called token black then. I want to understand what the difference is between that thing that I remember from Norman Lear sitcoms and what my parents used to talk about and what the basis of this policy is now. And I have to say to the audience, folks, I wasn't being cute. I meant this at the time. Now, if I asked that, I would be being up. But at this point, I really didn't know. Imagine me younger and stupider. All I was doing was being in plays and studying linguistics. And the guy turned to me and said, and there's a point to this. He said, well, back in the 60s, if you asked me about blah, 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 I would have said it was tokenism. Yeah, it was tokenism. They had these people who were blah, 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 and that was tokenism. And then he turned away and continued saying the things he was saying to the rest of the room. He didn't make the connection. He didn't see that what he had just said undercut what I the next day saw him saying at a microphone in front of a cheering crowd. Now, this is why I'm mentioning this.
Okay.
I don't think he saw the contradiction. He genuinely didn't see it. He was caught up in the new religion, and this man was even then probably about 60, so it's not immaturity in his part. He's caught up in the religion. Now, you're saying these people are bluffing. Was that passionate Latino advocate of racial preferences talking about poverty and talking about how we can't pay attention to grades and scores, etc.? What's the bluff under any definition? I didn't see him as bluffing.
Okay, I see what you mean. You can't be bluffing if you don't know that you're holding a bad hand.
Yeah.
That seems to be what if I
Yes.
boil it down to my
Right.
metaphor.
Yeah.
You have to actually know that when the cards are turned over, if the other guy calls you, you're going to lose in order to qualify definitionally for it to be a bluff.
I
So
thought.
if people actually somehow believe that they're holding a winning hand
Right. Which he did.
and firmly stand on the fact that I've got the better cards, then what you're relying on, and maybe bluff is the wrong word, I'm prepared to reconsider my language, Mr. Linguist. Then what you're relying on is that you're not going to be called.
Which he wasn't, and he did know that he wasn't. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe what I want to do is shift the onus here from the people who I continue to insist they're holding losing cards. 21st century, it's not the mid-1960s anymore. Scores of millions of non-white immigrants have come to the United States since the mid-1960s. By and large, they're prospering. The whole dynamic is moving away from the black-white bipolarity on which all of this stuff, including Ta-Nehisi Coates, rests. The future belongs to a globalized and technocratically smart and fast-moving, et cetera, even though I don't think much of Thomas Friedman. I don't think he's wrong about everything. So they're holding a losing hand. Maybe they don't know that they're holding a losing hand, and maybe these people in the universities, okay, so the diversity narrative, and it is religion, I agree. We're going to be open and inclusive. We're counting our numbers. No, they don't see the tokenism even in it, even though they're building the tokenism in institutionally for forever, okay? They are creating a world in which performance doesn't mean the same thing across racial lines. This is what people like Ward Connerly and Shelby Steele and Clarence Thomas used to warn against 25 years ago. They were right about that. They were right about that, okay? They may have been wrong about a whole lot of stuff, but they were not wrong about that. Everybody knows it. Okay? Everybody knows it. I mean, this is the world that I live in. I'm in an economics department at an Ivy League university. I was visiting out at Stanford as a visiting scholar at the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences. I go to these seminars. I go to these venues. I give these lectures myself at Oxford, at the Columbia School of Public Affairs, and everywhere else in between. Okay? The paucity of black faces in those rooms is known to everybody in those rooms. It's a dynamic world. You're seeing a lot of Asians in these places that you didn't see 25 years ago. You're not seeing many more blacks in these places than you saw 25 years ago. Everybody knows that it's not the fault of racist white institutions. They all know it. They're not going to say it, but they all know it. So when your confident Latina stands up and says about affirmative action, what do you mean? It's like milk and honey. It's the natural flow and fiber of equity and justice. And everybody nods like this in affirmation. They know that they're lying. They know they're lying. Okay. So I have to revise my story on the fly here, John. You're being helpful to me. I'll get it right eventually. Such folks are dependent upon a certain kind of generosity, a certain kind of forbearance, a certain kind of license. Okay? People who listen to the racist screed, which Ta-Nehisi Coates rendered in repudiation of Kanye West. Racist screed. Hateful, racist screed. Know that they're listening to a hateful, racist screed. I think many of them do. I think they do. I mean, I don't see how it can even be missed. Whiteness is desiccation of humanity?
I hadn't heard that one yet.
Well, this is about Michael. We should get into it in a systematic way. This is about Michael Jackson wanting not to be black. And you could see the kind of African nobility draining from his face with every skin tone treatment or every nose job or whatever it might be. It's about that. This is about how Kanye's embrace of Trump, to the extent that he embraced it, and Kanye's affirmations on behalf of freedom and agency for black people, rid yourselves of a slave mentality, how Kanye West's betrayal in this regard is reminiscent to the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates of how he felt when he watched Michael Jackson bleach himself to whiteness. Both of them want to be white. They've both betrayed their essential black roots and their obligations as black artists and as demigods to their millions and billions of fans in virtue of their desire to be white. They are seeking freedom, individual liberation, realization of themselves, but at the expense of abandoning their people, betraying their people, and embracing a phony, corrupted, desiccated, bone-dry, reeking, bereft of humanity whiteness. That's the argument. I'm not making that up, people. You all read the essay for yourself. I'm not making that up. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not quoting, but I am not exaggerating. So, despicable, racist, essentialist screed, a dead end in terms of political philosophy, in terms of moral reasoning, in terms of social change, an absolute dead end, going nowhere, nowhere in America, nowhere in Trump's America, nowhere in America, going nowhere. It's an empty hand, okay? And all of the kerfluffle and all of the adulation and all of the eyes rolling in the back of heads and the jumping up and down and standing on chairs doesn't change a damn thing.
Well, you know, Glenn, and I should say that openly can admit it, don't read his books. I am constitutionally incapable of spending my time actually reading his articles line by line. I can never get past the first couple of paragraphs. But I pay very close attention to the coverage of the pieces. And with this one, I haven't read it, and I won't read it. But I have read a lot of the coverage because that way I can keep it down. And so I feel like I can comment on this piece without having read it. Audience, I apologize for that. And to be honest, Glenn, I would say that you do realize that his white readers are reading that and no, they don't. They're not shaking their heads. They don't, quote unquote, know that it's wrong, or at least they only do in a part of their brain. A lot of white people are reading that and flagellating themselves and enjoying it. They're reading him describing white America that way. And the best I can think of it is it's either that they read it and they think that he doesn't mean them. Although at this point, anybody who's read more than 2 or 3 of his pieces has to understand that even if you were one of the quote-unquote good white people, he doesn't like you either. And if it isn't that, then it's that they think that, well, yes, I have this inner racist and I must always acknowledge my white privilege, and therefore it is good for me to read this person and his anger against people like me and beat me, hit me. I really do think that's how these people feel. And that is what we're up against.
Okay.
So, no, they don't know. They don't know at all.
I got to quote this. John. You're going to be mad at me because I'm quoting Ta-Nehisi Coates in our video blog. But I'm going to go ahead and quote this one paragraph. Okay, so please just bear with me. Okay, so this is Coates saying that West is not only ignorant because West believes what he believes, but he's also dangerous. And he says the following: it is so hard to honestly discuss the menace without forgetting. It's hard because what happened to America in 2016 has long been happening in America before there was an America. When the first Carib was bayoneted and the first African delivered up in chains. It's hard to express the depths of the emergency without bowing to the myth of a past American unity, when in fact, American unity has always been the unity of conquistadors and colonizers. Unity premised on Indian killings, land grabs, noble internments, and the gallant General Lee. Here is a country that specializes in defining its own deviancy down so that the criminal, the immoral, and the absurd become the baseline, so that even now, amidst the long tragedy and this lately disaster, the guardians of truth rally to the liar's flag. Nothing is new here. The tragedy is so old, but even within it, there are actors, some who've chosen resistance and some like West who, however blithely, have chosen collaboration.
Is it over?
Are you not moved, John? Okay. Is that the... No, I have a serious point here. Is it true? Is that the America that we live in? Okay? I think that's a yes or a no. Okay, my answer is no. it not being true and being said and and celebrated for having so been said, what responsibility falls to us? Okay,
That's a good question.
if you agree with me that it's not true about America, the responsibility of defending America against that racist screed falls to us, is what I would say. Let me say it one more time. My responsibility is to defend my country against that bombast and dangerous racist screed. I don't apologize for doing so. And by the way, anyone who's listening who thinks that I have some motives other than the ones that I have just stated can go straight to hell. I don't care whether or not you characterize me as obsessed with somebody. I'm not worried about that. Okay, you can go straight to hell.
I'm not laughing at you, Glenn.
That's okay, John. That's all right, man. You can laugh at me because I know that I'm sometimes a comic figure.
You can't tell the audience to go to hell, but you did.
I didn't tell the whole audience to go to hell. And I hope you continue to listen and watch, even if I did tell you to go to hell. Is this like the NFL? Hey, is this like the NFL players taking a knee? Is that what I just did?
That is what it is. All right, I'm gonna be devil's advocate again.
Good.
Everybody's thinking, well, certain buddies thinking, you can't be a racist from the bottom. If you're punching up, you can't be a racist. And let's say, for people who are thinking that way, my problem with something like the rightage that you just quoted is that I don't like the idea that the way you continue the struggle, as somebody of mine, maybe your generation, was given this idea. The way you continue the struggle is not to be anti-empirical. And the way that you continue the struggle is not to fall for a notion that for black people and black people alone, poetry is somehow closer to truth. Because frankly, that falls into some of the oldest stereotypes in the book. So, okay, the belletristic appeal is clear. But no, what that describes is false. It's not constructive to pretend that that is the America we live in, even despite Starbucks. Many people would say right now, no, what about what happened to those guys in Starbucks? And frankly, as really shitty as that was, to pretend that happening means that America now is not changed significantly from America even 50 years ago. We don't have to get into slavery. Is simply, now you might call it racist, Glenn. I would just say it's unempirical, it's melodramatic, and it's unconstructive, except in teaching black people that defeatism is a form of identity formation, and teaching white people that some sort of replacement Christianity where you think of yourself as being full of the original sin of racism and that your job is to allow yourself to be smited by an angry God of, racism battle. Boy, that sentence just fell apart. Glenn, you're sitting here getting me upset. Is not constructive at all. I mean, basically what that creates is black people thinking that the way you become important is by crying victim, and white people who think that the way you become a good person is by pretending to think that it's still 1900 for black people. So I have my problem with it there. But what about what Mr. West said? So remember that Kanye West said that slaves were in some way complicit in their situation, that they must have somehow liked it to be that way. And it seems to me that last week that was treated as one of the news stories of the week, what Kanye West had to say. And, my vision of it was really, frankly, Kanye West is a great artist. And I say that I counted this morning before I came in. I wanted to put my money where my mouth is. Four Kanye CDs. And I really did listen to them. I've kind of let it go lately. Yeah. But in the beginning, I really thought he was fantastic, as much of a jack as he acted like. Great artist. But, here's a person of modest education who has a certain alpha male, put it all out there personality and likes to stir things up, brags of not reading books. Here's this person, and he says something. He says something that's based in ignorance, and he said it. I'm not sure why. Well, I do think I know why, but quote unquote, I'm not sure why we have to pay so much attention to what he said. I remember back in the 80s about apartheid. A black person of modest education not uncommonly said, I say this having heard about 3 black people kind of from the hood say this casually. They would say there was something that kind of got around on the street that black people in South Africa must have been complicit in some way with the white takeover there, because why didn't they just fight those whites off? There were so many more black people than white. And so they thought somebody must have let those white people in. I saw that said in certain settings where people would smack hands, do high fives after that. The idea of it, and nobody seemed to understand that guns overpower. It was just, they really thought it must be that there were black people who wanted it that way. Kanye West saying that isn't too far removed from that kind of ignorant ideology. And yet we have to pay all that attention to what he said.
Let me comment. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, be careful about a kind of creeping elitism. Kanye West doesn't have much education, therefore, etc. A person of modest education says this about South Africans. So I remember there's this passage in Baldwin where he comes back and visits somebody who was in high school with him or something in New York City, and the guy's just a working class schmo, and Baldwin is Baldwin.
I read that. Yeah.
And the guy he wants to explain why we were in Vietnam, because he has this view about Vietnam. Kanye West has this view about Trump, why we should, give Trump a chance or whatever this view is. This working class person whom you described had that view about South Africa. Well, Buthelezi, the guy that was the Zulu chieftain over there who's kind of collaborated with the apartheid government. Well, they might point to him and say, well, he's black and he doesn't, etc.
Right.
And the thing I want to warn against is attributing such retrograde or backward views, let me stipulate that they are such, to the fact that the person simply doesn't have enough education. If they had more education, they would be smart like us and they'd agree with us. And I think sometimes a person's failure to go along with what has become the consensus kind of narrative for the cognoscenti isn't a matter so much of ignorance as it is a matter of not being blinkered. So, you say Kanye West is stupid enough to think that African slaves actually chose to get on the ship, chose to put on the whip on their backs, chose to put the, shackles on their ankle. I don't think he believes that. I don't think anybody believes that. I think what he probably was meant to say, and this is not trying to make any excuses for him, it's just common sense in my view, is that there's a slave mentality which you can choose to live within or you can choose to throw off. Now, by the way, there's some serious questions. There are questions, if you're prepared to have philosophical courage, about whether or not, if faced with the choice between slavery and death and you choose slavery, that's not a choice, okay? That's a serious philosophical question. You can put it to the Jews who confronted death camps. You can put the same kind of existential philosophical question. You can put it there. You want to put it very carefully. You want to put it in very close context. You want to seem not to be blaming the victim for the awful Holocaust which befell them, okay? But nevertheless, there is a question about whether or not a man, to put it in the kind of male chauvinistic terms, but I can hear this language echoing back through classical philosophical reflection for centuries, doesn't have an obligation to fight to the death under such circumstances as is being confronted by the degradation associated with slavery. That's a fair question, okay? Having said all of that, of course, Kanye, but here we are in the year 2018 talking about slavery. Every third word, it's about slavery. Now, as I've said here, and I won't repeat, the failures that are palpable, that stare us in the face, cry out for some such false narrative, and for a rapper of some celebrity to point out, it's a false narrative, y'all. Slavery been over for a long time. Can we please get on with the business at hand, which is making our way in a competitive world? It's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard. No one's coming to save us. No one's going to give us a damn thing. Get busy like I got busy. I made me, you made you. Okay? Now, I'm not endorsing every word of that. But what I'm saying is there's no reason for the skies to fall, for people to roll in the streets heartbroken at the betrayal of somebody, for saying something as necessary to be said, right or wrong, as that. The conversation is ossified. It's calcified. No one can say anything.
Well, there are a couple of things. Slave mentality, that part of that conversation was important because I think, and I agree with you here, I think what Kanye was really referring to is that he has picked up that people talk about a slave mentality that can hinder people even after slavery itself has passed by. That is a meme in black conversation. I'm sure that he's heard it. I'm sure that he's thought about it. And no, I don't mean to say that the only reason somebody might not agree with it, they're not educated. I'm not calling him in particular dumb. I mean, frankly, talk about intelligence. He couldn't be dumb to have produced that music that he made. But in this case, the man is not tidy. He's not tidy. He's just like Trump is not mentally tidy. He's been unwell, and he likes to provoke, and he likes to show off. He's heard this phrase, slave mentality, and then in a sloppy way, he extended it to slaves themselves, and then he moves on, and then he finds that everybody, zeroes in on that one thing. No, I don't. I think that there's some epistemology behind why he said that. Now, as to the other thing you said about how what he said wasn't so awful in its way, I've often said about Kanye West that, even a stop clock is right twice a day. And this was the second time for me. I liked his take on throwing the Confederate flag in people's faces in order to take away its power to sting. This time, when he says racism isn't a deal breaker for me about Trump. Now, is Kanye West, once again, I'm going to sound condescending, but is he thinking about the political issues involved in Donald Trump? Not just Donald Trump's racist or whatever statements, but the sort of president he seemed like he was going to be even beforehand. Is Kanye thinking about those things? No. Kanye West likes Donald Trump's manner because, as quiet as it's kept, Donald Trump acts like a rapper. I mean, it's the same personality.
I got
Donald Trump doesn't have the rhythm. So
of course he's going to like.
But the point being, when Kanye says racism isn't a deal breaker for me, what he means is that he likes the man's manner, he likes the cut of his jib, and the fact that he might not like Kanye or his mother just isn't a deal breaker. And to tell you the truth, I agree with that. I think that more of us need to think that way. Now, racist abuse, that's different. Starbucks is different. Many people listening to us are thinking, yeah, but what about Starbucks? But the idea that Donald Trump says some things that aren't racially sensitive, that you can tell he would have been very upset if Ivanka had married a black man, frankly, that to me is not as hurtful or as scary as his views about North Korea or Iran or our economy or any number of things. Racism alone, the fact that he has backwards opinions, is not a deal breaker for me in the same way as it isn't for Kanye. And yeah, I think that people could listen to him saying that and think, yeah, we focus too much on this issue of witch hunting for racism as if we're in Salem.
I want you to watch out. I want you to watch out because Trump might be right about North Korea and he might be right about the economy. Okay, I just got to go on the record and say that.
He's not and he won't be.
Okay,
but anyway.
But then we're arguing about North Korea and about the economy and not so much about Trump because, these ideas are... And we're going to see what happens. But I do want to say something. Trump like a rapper. He's like a rapper, no wonder Kanye likes him. I like that idea very much. I get that. I get the bombast and the self-promotion. I get the kind of, performative aspects of it, the political rapper. I mean, it puts me in mind of Bulworth. You remember that Warren Beatty movie from way back when?
Well. Very well, yeah.
Anyway, and I want to exactly. Halle Berry has a beautiful role in that, and I want to underscore the fantastic irony of it. Okay, because here you have this man who is racist anathema. Okay, Trump. Coates reviews it in his Screed, how much of a racist Trump is. He just drips with racism. He's a racism at every turn, from Charlottesville to the Central Park 5 to the whatever. And yet, if one looks for where African American culture has actually penetrated American politics, one might find it only on a superficial level with Obama, who is as conventional an American politician as you can imagine. And one might find it in an actual, a deeply rooted way in the performative dynamic, which is a reality TV personality getting self-elected president. Okay? When a rapper says, as Kanye has said, he said, I think I might be president one day, everybody laughed at me. Then I looked up and I saw Trump was president. I said, damn, I wasn't that crazy after all. He's actually, forget about Kanye West, I agree with you, why should we care what he thinks? But I mean, he's actually kind of pulling the cover back on something, it seems to me. Johnny's pulling the cover back on how deep the influence of African American performative culture is in American public life. So much so that this embodiment of racism in the minds of the editorial writers at the liberal magazines turns out to actually be the guy who's delivering a kind of performative politics that is inspired by. Okay, I go too far with this. I know I go too far. I'm not trying to defend it as a position. I'm just trying to throw it out there as a provocative observation.
Barely. No, it really is true. I mean, Kim Kardashian, in a way, is sort of like this fantasy combination, in many ways, of all of the women Donald Trump married.
She's a big booty Melania. Excuse me, but that's what you're saying.
That's
what you're saying. And in the ghetto, we like the big booty. Okay, everybody get mad at me, but there you are. Believe me, in the hip hop world, they understood what I just said. Okay.
Yeah. And that's Trump is a rapper. Of course, Kanye would like him. Kanye is not the only rapper who has said things like that about Donald Trump. They like his style. And, style matters a lot today. That people were saying 100 years ago that style mattered too much in America. It certainly matters now. Okay, and so Kanye was just BSing the way I'll bet legions of young black men across this country who have said, after a sip or two of whatever, that they actually kind of like Trump. Many of them will say it in the media.
Apparently it's showing up in the polls a little bit. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And you know something? What I find bemusing is that we had to spend the whole week talking about what this rapper said, because I really, and now I'm being monotonous, but I think that people saw it as an occasion for proselytizing and prayer. Because really, supposedly all the editorials were, Kanye West is tapping into a narrative about happy slaves that must be countered. And so we're getting all these descriptions of things that people wrote in 1813 and things that Southern senators said in 1920 and, the view of Reconstruction that W.E.B. Du Bois was battling. And all that's well and good, but you have to answer a certain question after a certain point. How urgent is it in America in 2018 to teach the populace that slaves weren't happy and that they weren't complicit in what they did? Now, is there the occasional person on the fringes who's under that impression? Probably, because all of us know under other circumstances that life is never perfect. But is there at this point what John Stuart Mill would have recognized as a pretty strong consensus among not only highly educated people, but frankly, most people, that slavery wasn't good, that nobody liked it, that people tried to escape a lot? Haven't we seen a lot of movies that indicate that? For example, movies are very educational in that way. We've gotten to a point where I don't think that the United States needs to be taught that slaves weren't happy. Now, was that a message that maybe was useful in 1976? Sure. And there was roots and a lot was learned.
Hold on, John.
Wait, Glenn, I'm almost done. Point being, I don't think anybody last week, you talk about what people's real motives are, I don't think anybody last week really thought that message needed to be taught. Kanye West gave everybody a reason to basically pray. What everybody was doing was showing what they know, because the idea is that that's how you show that you're a good person. If you're a good person, if you're white, if you're black, you're doing this because you consider it your job to constitute this message to the nation of its wrongs. I don't think that all of that really created anything. Everybody just kind of performed to bring it in full circle. I don't think it was a teaching moment. It was a performing moment.
Yeah, okay. Duly noted. I don't agree or disagree. I'm only thinking about what I wanted to say while you were talking. So let me try to digest what you just said.
I do that sometimes.
It turned out to be the occasion where a lot of people could get out and display their fealty to the religious doctrine which animates them on racial questions, and it was a good vehicle for that. I want to take a little bit of issue with that, because I think Kanye West is right about some stuff, and I want to say what I think he's right about. And it has to do with Trump, and you're not going to like it. I forgot the other thing that I wanted to say. You talked so long, John, I couldn't keep track of it. Yeah, maybe it'll come back to me. Okay, what do I think Kanye West is right about? So Trump, the racist. You say Trump is the quintessential racist. See, I think that's wrong. I think Trump is the president of the United States. I don't know if he's more or less racist than John F. Kennedy was. I actually really don't know. I don't know. That's Glenn Loury. Y'all get mad at me. I do know that there have been a blizzard of stories every time Trump does anything that suggests that it might not be racially appropriate that project the narrative that Trump is a racist. And I know that those stories weren't written about JFK. But if you just get right down to it, malevolence, anti-black antipathy, hatred, racism, crude stereotyping, presumption of the incapacities of black people, sneering contempt, I don't know that he's any more racist than a lot of people who've occupied that office. Okay,
while you're coming up with what you were going to say, I would say there's a nice litmus test on that. How would John Kennedy have felt if one of his children married a black person? And I think that we don't even need to wonder. And he was a person of his time.
And how would Papa Joe Kennedy have felt about that?
He would have had the person killed. And I think John F. Kennedy...
Let me go on and make my point, John.
All right.
But okay, litmus test accepted. Okay, so Trump the racist. All right, I understand the utility of that trope, of that narrative construction. I understand why that's politically potent. B, I understand Trump's vulnerability to it. I haven't forgotten about the Central Park Five. I haven't forgotten about the birther stuff either. Okay, he's president of the United States. I keep saying this, people get mad at me. He won an election that's really significant. Okay, he ran for office saying, I want to help fix this problem in reference to some of the problems of grave concern to people who care about black people. Maybe he was insincere, maybe he wasn't. Okay, it's entirely possible that he wasn't insincere. I'm going to say it for a third time. Trump didn't have to be lying about that. For black people to presume that he was lying, to wash our hands of any possibility of anything positive coming out of his possible 8 years in the Oval Office, and to stand back with our arms folded across our chest and our foot tapping, sneering, is foolishness. It's foolishness. For there to be no significant corner of African American opinion and political activism that seeks to work with the administration is foolishness. Okay? That's Glenn Loury saying what I think Kanye West might have said if he had been a little bit more articulate about it. He's president of the United States. This is the only country that we've got. There isn't any way around that. Now, you can work to defeat him. Why should black people's political interests be defined by the editors at The Atlantic? Why should I want to make this very clear. African Americans are a significantly Christian, culturally conservative population. They worship in storefront Bible-believing churches, many of them. Many millions of them do. I'm not asking you to endorse their religiosity. I'm not endorsing their religiosity.
But it's a reality.
I'm saying there's pluralism. There's pluralism of views about abortion. There's pluralism of views about crime and about Black Lives Matter. There's pluralism of views about microaggressions. There's pluralism of views about America in the black community. The people who salute the flag, who are black, are not fools. They're not knaves. They are not beneath contempt. And the attitude that they somehow betrayed their blackness is stupid. It's ahistorical. It's one-dimensional. It's foolish, superficial, self-congratulatory idiocy. Okay? To reject this country to court because our ancestors many generations ago were slaves is foolishness. Okay? That's what I think Kanye West might have been trying to say, and I think it's right.
Glenn, I want to throw something in here that we're probably going to touch on as we move on in time, however.
Yeah. I'll give you the last word, John.
Trump's been in for longer than 5 or 6 months at this point. You want it to be sloppy. He's going to have been in for 2 years pretty soon. We're getting close to the middle.
Yep.
Now, Trump, the Central Park episode, Charlottesville, it's clear that he does not, quote unquote, get it about race. Now, is he a malevolent racist? I doubt if he thinks about race or racism or frankly anything enough to qualify as a malevolent racist. But does he care? And he said some things while he was campaigning that suggested that he was going to do some stuff. Now, what would the verdict be at this point? Now, he puts in Ben Carson, who was transparently underqualified and doesn't even have charisma, as his race point man.
Yeah.
Now, maybe he wanted to do that so that he could lead Ben Carson around by the nose and come up with, let's just let's keep the expectations minimal. One thing for Black America, and he was hoping that, Carson would just be his point man. Now, Trump does care about some things, the sorts of things that, involve his ego, such as North Korea, etc. But in terms of domestic policy, once you get past this fantasy that he's going to bring back the lunch pail factory life to people in places like Ohio, what has Trump done that suggests that he even wants to throw a bone to America's Black people and their problems? So that's not to say that he's a malevolent racist.
I got it. I should respond to that.
I would have predicted this, so go ahead.
No, you have a point. He's done nothing, essentially. You could point to low unemployment broadly in a booming economy. That's true, and blacks are benefiting from that. So having said that, he's done little. Yes, Ben Carson is his point man, and with respect to Ben Carson, I'm not a Carson hater. He's unimpressive. Empty suit might be overstating it, but not by much.
No.
Okay,
yeah.
So Trump put an empty suit at HUD where he might have put a really strong figure who could have fashioned some initiative within his administration in the first term that would have been significant.
One thing.
He didn't do that, and that is our evidence against the position that I just set out, and I'm going to acknowledge that. I'm disappointed. I think that the racist screed mongers are not the only people who can be wrong in this situation, who can miss opportunities and who can misread America. I think, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think a tremendous opportunity is being missed by President Trump not to go ahead and take some part of that infrastructure program that he's talking about and explicitly make it about doing something about inner cities, about transportation, about jobs, about infrastructure, about training, about whatever, okay? It almost doesn't matter what it is. It wouldn't have to be a whole lot. I've used the figure $100 million. It could be $1 billion. It doesn't have. That's not a whole lot. I think it would have to be sold right. I think there would be a political thicket if you were to do it. I think it's worth doing. I wish that somebody were whispering that in his ear. Worth doing because it's really possible that this narrative that he introduced, which is y'all have been loyal to the Democrats forever, what have you got to show for it, could break through. Not with a majority. Doesn't have to be a majority. You move 10% of that vote in Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, et cetera, you see the point.
A new reality.
It's a completely new ball game if he can get 25 or 30% of the African-American vote, or 20% of it. So I agree that the evidence so far is not friendly to my hypothesis that he wasn't lying to black people and to America when he said, don't worry, I can fix this. I sure hope I'm wrong about that. I hope he was not lying, but I don't know that.
I don't think he was lying.
Well,
he didn't genuinely care.
Didn't care.
It wasn't really on his mind.
Well, the audience is going to agree with you, John, and I'm going to get a lot of abuse, but I'm used to it. I'm okay.
Well, I'm condescending, and I'm going to catch it too. But this was, I think, we were very honest in this one.
Yeah.
I feel purged today.
Good.
This is good.
Good. John, thanks for coming on the Gwen Show. This one is going in the books, and we'll talk again soon.
As always.
Bye-bye.